Welcome to the Permanent Change of Station podcast, a place where friends can come together, agree or disagree, and still be friends. Join attorney and Forever Miss Oregon, Lynette Perez, each week as she covers such topics as law, relationships, faith, and current events. No matter the issue, Lynette believes it's time for a permanent change of station.
Good morning. This is Lynette with the Permanent Change of Station podcast. And this morning, I have some awesome women with me. The topic that has really been on my heart because it was a part of my journey. It was actually a part of my mother's journey. Most people don't even realize that even my own mother, who was married for 40 years to my stepfather, had a period of 5 years in her life when even she was a single mom. And I can tell you the choices that she made and the things that she did even during that period really set us all up for success. Even though her life changed when she met my stepfather and they had a long, successful marriage, that period was a very instrumental period for her. And I can tell you unequivocally, the 12 years that I was a single parent, that was a pivotal period in my life as well. And so today I have three of my friends, those who are going through this journey right now. I said, hey, I need you all to, come along with me this morning as a way to help encourage others who may be going through this phase of their lives as well. And so I've got Elise, Shay, and Cindy with me, who are awesome single moms that I know doing phenomenal things. And the fruit is, to me, is how well their children are thriving and being successful in all that they do. And so with that, ladies, how are you doing this morning? Tell me, what have you been up to and what crossed your mind when I asked you to do this segment with me? You first, Elise.
I'm doing great. I really appreciate, the opportunity to be on here with you. And I was just excited because I do have a passion for women and single moms. And so I just took it, as an opportunity to share my story. And, so many times when we're going through that time in our lives, we feel so alone, even though divorce is extremely common and, single motherhood is also extremely common. At the time you feel alone. And so I just took it as an opportunity to come and, talk and chat with other moms. And, I really admire you and what you do. And, you're such a beacon of light everywhere you go, especially on social media and socially and what you do in the courtroom. And so I was like, yeah, I'll join you. So.
Oh, thank you. Shay, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I was excited about the opportunity because no one ever prepares you for this. So, like you were saying, like you feel alone, but you come to find out there's so many people that share a portion of your story and have been through the same thing that can help you through it. And at first, it just feels like you're in survival mode. But really, taking a look back, I was married for almost 20 years and I've been a single mom for 5. But really, I have grown so much more in the past 5 years than I did in the 20 that I was married. And it really has taken me from survival mode to thriving. And so I really appreciate the opportunity and want to help as many people as I can, just because it feels so much a lighter load. It feels easier when you have other people around you supporting you and just being that support system, but also really just trusting and relying on God because, we try to control a lot of the situation and we can't. But when we release it to Him, He is able to do so much more and, guide your steps to make the right opportunities come across your path. And so I'm excited to be here and I appreciate you, Lynette. You have been such a great inspiration and example to me in so many ways. So many years of friendship from Las Vegas to seeing your journey. And, your book was super inspirational to me in a pivotal time in my life as well. And, just having that sisterhood, because having that, like with the divorce, you feel like there's a void in your life, but really there's so many people around you that can help you through that time in your life. And it may not be forever, but even if it is, just having that, village for
Yes.
yourself and for your kids is super important. So I'm happy.
And Miss Cindy, how are you? And we're going to have to.
I was shocked to receive this invitation. As you know, Lynette, I am one of your greatest admirers and admire the journey that you've been on, and you've poured into me a lot. But I've only been divorced for 2 years. I'm 50, almost 52 years old. Crazy. People are like, why would you give up security? Why would you give up this life? You've been married for 30 years. Your children are just about grown. Are they? Mine, two were actually already out of the house by the time I made this decision, and I have a special needs child still with me and will always be with me. And even with that, people were in shock that I would take this step. But we were even kind of a gold standard in our community as far as marriage goes and family goes. But what's on the outside is not always what's on the inside. And I am glad for the decisions that have been made. And when your children do not shed a tear when you make that announcement, then you know that's been the right move and that everyone's hearts have been prepared. And I echo Elise and Shay and Lynette in that God takes care of everything you need. And I too want to be an encouragement, because I have been encouraged. People have come. I just got off of an Emmaus walk, so I'm extremely raw to this. And to see Christ come alongside in the stranger of Luke 24 in this Easter season, that's what I'm thinking about. As I look back over the last 2 years of all of those, I would think I would recognize Christ by now. After studying him, after trying to minister myself back into a marriage, trying every avenue, and it just didn't work. But yet now, as he comes alongside Shay, I echo you. In the last 2 years, I've learned more about myself, about my children, about detaching from them to let them be who God wants them to be, but coming alongside them and other women as well in my own shoes, but also being receptive to those who come alongside me to feed and to nourish in a way only Christ can do. So I think we're all about on the same page. I appreciate the invitation.
For me, I had my biological parents had divorced when I was very young. And so in many ways, I had, the one thing I never wanted to ever do was get divorced. I mean, it was like this little thing had been imprinted in my brain that, well, I can't have that happen to me. And so in many ways, I was like this overachiever in so many different areas, of my life. But the relationship piece was always a big challenge, for me. And so when I knew I absolutely had to, I could no longer live the life I was living, there was a lot of guilt, associated with that. And a lot of it stemmed from my own, childhood experience that I had never really talked about or resolved. And then also a lot of shame that I had to. And I remember Shay and I used to attend the same church in Las Vegas. And there was this one time, there was this altar call about, people, if you have generational issue or whatever, here's the altar call. And I was like looking at all these other, people go to the altar. But then if I got convicted that I too was dealing with kind of a generational situation of guilt and shame as it related to divorce, and I needed to rid myself of it. And, my mom, had been saying for months, come home. Okay. They were living in San Antonio, Texas, come home. But I was like, I'm like 40 years old, who goes home? I had left home when I was 18, went to college, did all that stuff. Who comes home? But I think one of the biggest game changers for me was when I finally got rid of that shame and that pride and took my parents up and going home to San Antonio. And I mean, you all have seen my journey of what all has happened to my life since leaving Las Vegas and going to San Antonio, but just dealing with the shame and the pride associated with going through a divorce. And mine, because I was a public official, was all in the news. Okay, so was it, and you're already going through, a very emotionally charged, stressful situation for anybody, but to have it put out there in the public sphere for all to consume was a whole nother level that only added to the shame and the guilt and all of the problems. Did any of you also kind of experience that same situation?
I did for sure. My parents were married for over 30 years. My mom, she passed away, and their wedding anniversary is actually next Saturday. They would have been married like 45 years, I believe. And so my dad is now remarried and everything, but I can totally relate to the shame and the embarrassment. I'm like Cindy, we too were relationship goals, if you will, and everybody thought we were the Huxtables, and we weren't. We weren't. And there was just a lot of things that I was blind to that I didn't realize was going on until I got out of it. And so I was, if you will, my hand was forced to leave just due to safety and things like that. But we were the face of our marriage ministry. So it was very public. So I get it. But at the end of the day, I believe when you have Christ in your life, he gives you that peace and that resolve that lets you know that it's okay. And we know that he doesn't put you under condemnation. And so when those feelings of humiliation and condemnation come up, you can just take that time to rest in him and know that those feelings and those thoughts aren't from him. So I can totally relate to wanting to hide and feeling a way that I'm not worthy to encourage anybody. I'm not worthy to speak to anybody about these situations. But so much healing came from sharing my story and came from being transparent about it. And so it just really helped me through it. And also therapy. They say the therapist needs a therapist, so I go faithfully every 3 weeks. So I highly encourage you, if you are not in counseling, to find one. Sometimes it, takes a little bit to find a good fit for you, but I was fortunate enough to right off the bat have a great fit, and she really helped me do the work.
And speaking of therapists, I would say that even during that season of singlehood relationship that I had gotten myself entangled with, which I think from day one I knew was not an equally yoked, situation. But, I went to therapists and sharing what that I was going through with that relationship. And the therapist says, well, why are you with this person? Why are you in this situation? And I actually said to the therapist, well, because I'm his last best hope. I actually said those words to the therapist. And the therapist replied to me, it says, I want to challenge you on that. He's his last best hope. You're not his last best hope. He's his last best hope. So I'm a big believer in having someone who's a neutral party in a therapeutic setting, especially, post-divorce, to help us navigate those things and to, just be, again, a disinterested, neutral party to help, give some perspective. And I see, Shay, you're nodding your head.
I I can completely relate to that because I feel like that I have felt like that then and in my marriage and even in the divorce, like he wanted me to help him navigate getting himself together after the divorce. And I'm like, but if I don't help him, who's going to help him? And thankfully, I had people in my life that were like, as long as you keep handling the situations for him, you're enabling him to never have to be able to handle it himself and or get the help that he needs or seek God and let God handle it. Like you can't be the solution. And that was hard for me because I am a helper. I'm a nurturer. I'm an encourager. Like I want to be there for people, even to the extent of helping my ex after the divorce. Like, I just don't want to see anybody have to struggle. I want to be there. But really just like taking a step back and being like, God, I put this in your hands. Like, I can't change other people. I can't make the decisions for them. And that was, the biggest thing too, because like, even as you're in this long marriage where everybody's looking at you as like the standard, the goals, all of these things, and you hold certain statuses in church where you're the group leaders, the Bible study leaders, or things like that. And things may look great on the outside, but there's a lot of things missing on the inside a lot of times. And so feeling like you're a failure because you couldn't fix it. But again, just coming to the point where you can't change the other person, and you did everything that you could do. And, there's peace on the other side of it. It is a lot, in between, and healing and prayer and learning and growing in yourself and in God, but just coming to the point where you can't be that person's only hope. They have to find their hope in God and in themselves too. And, that was a journey in my own self, learning boundaries, was another huge thing too, because you can't be accessible to them 24 hours a day to fix all of their problems, because you're always going to be that go-to person. But you have to also, like with the airline and the oxygen mask, you have to be able to fix yourself and get healing for yourself first before you can help anyone else. Because when you're pouring from an empty cup, you're going to have nothing left to give. And I found myself at that point many times. And so that was my learning experience.
Cindy, what was one of the things that you found most challenging in your new status?
Going to church was my big difficulty. My husband was an elder. I was Sunday school teacher. I ran international ministry within our church. I introduced so many children to Christ got a lot of them baptized. And then here I am, a defector who filed for divorce. And like I say, the gold standard in a community, and have counseled people in their own marriages, and felt so guilty doing it because I knew that I was a farce. But, going back to what Shay said, and enabling and being that, and as well as you, Lynette, you're being that person's last hope. And Lynette can attest, she's amazing, by the way. She represented me in my divorce, and we had our divorce mediated and done in 4 hours. And that entire time, I felt like I was fighting with Lynette, saying, he can't do that. He can't do that. Meaning that, when she would bring up a dollar amount for child support or whatever, and I would say, he can't afford that, or that's too much, or I'm not worth that type of attitude. And Lynette was just like, listen, you're worth this. You need to move forward with this. His problems are his problems, and you need to look out for you and your son, because you're going to be his guardian. So for that, I am grateful, but I can't echo enough. As far as new life goes, yes, I'd say the finger pointers in the church, it was difficult to return. He was ousted as an elder, just basically there really wasn't any reason for him to leave the church too, but just basically because of our divorce, he was not allowed to be an elder anymore. And there's certain privileges that go along with being an elder's wife. There's certain things that you get to do, and you just like, well, where do I fit now? So there's a guilt, that guilt mode that pops in. But then life changes, like Shay was talking about, having that growth period and really realizing what all you've missed the last 30 years. I just, in fact, wrote that to a friend this morning. And I just said, wow, the people I've met, the opportunities that I've had that I never would have had in that past life, that I never would have been allowed to have, because I was a controlled person. I was sheltered. I was put in a box and hidden away. And I had no clue I had worth. And to come out and actually find that is truly, it's life-giving. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I actually end up switching churches, and that's actually when I switched churches, that's how I met Shay. I had grown up, my biological father was Catholic, and so, even though my parents had divorced, I kind of held on to that family, heritage. That was like the one thing that still connected me, to him. And, I had been, basically a Catholic educated, went to Notre Dame, the whole, Catholic experience, but, had gone through all the sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, I think I know more about Catholicism than most practicing Catholics today, because I was just that entrenched in the Catholic, church, and, served on the board of Catholic Charities in Las Vegas for 8 years. I mean, that was, pretty much my existence was so entrenched in the Catholic Church. But when I went through that divorce, I didn't feel I could speak to, and this is no, criticism of the Catholic Church. In fact, I still to this day have a great love, for the Catholic Church but I myself could not relate, or I didn't think a person who had never been married, who had never been a parent before, could relate to my situation. And so that's how I went, and I found, Paul and Denise Goulet, at the International Church of Las Vegas. They were a married couple that had this ministry, very multicultural in Las Vegas. And I started attending. And in fact, the first counseling, he had been a counselor professionally before he became a pastor. And so the whole healing, ministry, therapeutic side was a very big part of that ministry. And I just started attending, church there. And it really did open up, my relationship with God. I realized that I was someone who attended church every Sunday, probably my entire life, but I didn't get saved until I went through a divorce situation and started attending another faith experience. And so I agree that sometimes can be one of the most stressful, situations when you're a church going person. And again, that's another thing that can add to that layer of guilt. But Christ, at least the Jesus I follow, is all about helping people find freedom and to lose shackles. And he went out of his way to that woman at the well who had had many husbands, and yet he found her, and just that encounter with her changed, the whole town after she started telling, from that, experience that she had encountered. Yeah, the whole church piece, I totally understand how that can be very stressful, situation when you're going through it as well, but at the same time can be the best hospital, for recovery, and knowing that, there are people around you and that can minister to you, and, and especially if you are in the right congregation for what you're going through in that season of your life. Another thing that was a big challenge for me, at first, because when I went through my divorce, it was like the whole economy had tanked. And so, Las Vegas had high unemployment. I had no, I went through this divorce. There was no jobs for anybody, to be had. And so there was a financial aspect of why I had to move home with my mom and dad. And I can tell you that just taking control of my finances really for the first time in my life was a huge part of this whole transformation for me. I mean, I literally, for the time I was married, I wasn't the one who managed the bills. So I couldn't tell you what our monthly expenses were. I couldn't tell you what was necessarily coming in or going out. I mean, he handled all of the financial aspects of it. And so I can tell you that I literally had fear when credit card bills or whatever. I was scared to literally open the envelope, that kind of shackled by fear. But I knew that that was one area that I had to really just take control over and get a handle of. Okay. And it has, reaped tremendous benefits, but that was probably one of the first things for me that was like, oh, uh-oh, whoa, I'm in charge of the finances now. Did any of y'all, I mean, did y'all have similar experience like that?
I had taken care of myself, when I first moved out. I moved out when I was 19. So I did know how to budget and pay bills and things like that. But when I got married, I am very submissive by nature. So it was very easy for me to relinquish all my control. And I really didn't want to know about it just because I wasn't confident in myself, and it was a self-esteem issue. So I didn't really love myself. So I wanted my husband to do it for me. So I was just like, you got it. I'll do this and this and this. I'll take care of the kids and clean the house and all this kind of stuff. And you be the provider. And no, I didn't necessarily say that with my words, but with my actions, because that's what I saw growing up. So I thought that that's how it should be. So when, later on down the road, I started coming into my own and wanting more input and wanting more of a say so, not as a control thing, but just wanting more to grow our marriage as a team. Let me help you. Let me, know what's going on. So if there's lack, I can pick up whatever. And I later found out, there was more controlling going on and more financial abuse going on than I was aware of. So being divorced and having to handle it all is very liberating, but at the same time can be stressful because when you're used to someone handling it all and you don't have any worries, you can get to a place to where, and I struggle with that sometimes now. It's like, man, I'm sick of doing all of this by myself. Even though I have financial support, child support and things like that, it's a different dynamic when you're married. But I said the next time I get married, which I believe that I will, just because marriage is very near and dear to my heart. It's part of who I am. I will set the foundation differently than when I did the first time because I'm a different person. I'm 38 now. I was 23 when I got married the first time. So I had no clue who I was back then. And I just have a different mindset and different maturity about those kinds of issues. So I can definitely relate to the fear and where is this going to come from? How am I going to handle this? And just having to navigate it all can be extremely overwhelming. But there is support. I would say, as an encouragement, don't be afraid to ask for help from whoever your family. There's different resources for single moms, students, things like that. So just, in those times of feeling overwhelmed and, unsure, highly advised to
What do you
reach
think,
out
Shay?
for help.
How's that been?
I agree. Well, it was a little bit different for me because I'm an accountant. I've been in the finance industry for about 15 years. So I always handled all the finances. The main difference for me was now I'm budgeting off of one income. Even though I have child support, I really tried to keep as much consistency in the kids' lives as possible. We just moved in the same neighborhood, but to a different house so they could stay in the same schools with their same friends and really keep that consistency as much as possible. We did make the church move because, it was sad. It was, like going back and feeling like a failure or feeling sad seeing families and couples together and not having to explain the story every single time you went to church. Like we did have to make a few important changes, but like you were saying, like my parents have been married for 45 years. This week was their anniversary, 45 years. So I never felt like I could go to them because they've never been through it. However, I had to seek out people that I had a lot of people around me that had been through it and that did have that experience and the good advice. But a lot of the good advice was if you need help, like don't feel bad about asking for it. And I've
Yes.
always just been the independent person. I moved out a week after I graduated high school and I've always lived on my own, like you, Lynette, like from 18, now I'm 40. And, I don't like asking for help. I'm independent. I can do it. I can make it work. I can figure this out. But there were times where I had to let my ego and be humble, like, let my ego go aside and just be humble and ask for the help. And when people are offering help, just being willing and open to receive it. Because, like when people are like, there's a story about when, someone's praying for God to send them a ship to save them and they keep letting the ships go by. God is sending you help. You just have to be open and welcome to receiving it. So there were times that we needed help, and it's not forever, but it gets you through that time that you need it right at that moment. So, thankfully, I did receive the help when I needed it. And, I've been able to rebudget things and, make it work somehow. God always makes a way, perfect love casts out all fear. So like just focusing on what needs to be done today and prioritizing not worrying about tomorrow or next week, but just focusing on what needs to be done today, what needs to be paid today, and then just trusting God and making the steps of faith, or making the calls for help if you need it. Those have been really important just for streamlining the process for myself and for my kids, because the finances do change.
And I think she may have dropped off, but she'll be right back. But as she was touching upon, I think that one point that really struck with me was living in the day that you're in. I think if there's ever one bit of advice I would offer to anyone that is going through single parenthood, single moms, single dads, is to, when yesterday is behind you, there's nothing you can do about yesterday. I mean, but you have the day that you're in to maximize that day and to not worry too much about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take, I mean, that is actually in the Bible, and you are more valuable than those, sparrows. And I mean, I can tell you that, just by, being a faithful, being someone that consistently tithe, just the little things like that has come back. And I've been rewarded in, those in many ways. But again, it's being transparent. It's about being humble, about taking advantage of those people that are willing to help you. I mean, my parents basically took my kids for the 6 weeks that I was studying for the bar exam. I mean, I knew that I've graduated law school, but I can't be a lawyer unless I have this license. And for that entire summer of 2012, my parents took the kids, and they had many adventures, and they were fed 3 square meals and all that. I didn't have to worry, but it was because I allowed them to just help me during this little window. And sure enough, I passed. Thank God. On the first, I was one and done. But what I also have witnessed, and I think this is a very important thing for single moms to know, is that our children are watching us. Okay. They may not totally, articulate or say it verbally or whatever, but they are observing how we navigate all of these things. And my children, just what I learned from them is, one, that they're a lot more resilient than we would want to give them credit for. And second, mine they saw me, studying that sacrifice, and they did it themselves. I didn't have to ever tell them, you need to do homework. Just by, I guess, watching me do that and study so intensely, they became the same way. Okay. And, my daughter is, believe it or not, graduating next month from high school. I don't know how that happened, but she literally was like a second grader when I was in law school, and now she's about to go to college, herself. But I never had to say, do your homework, whatever. They just, by observation. But at the same time, I learned that just even how I navigated relationships post-divorce, that there were scenarios I could not allow myself in because I didn't want my children to ever witness that. In fact, there were relationships I terminated because I knew I didn't want my daughter especially to witness me being mistreated in any way, or to think that was normal. And so our children are always observing and will mirror, I think, what they see. And Cindy, looks like you had some thoughts on that one.
Well, I read a quote actually this morning that says, win through actions, not through argument. So the whole do as I say, not as I do doesn't fly with kids. And when my daughter was going through her first psychology course in college, I had to watch over her shoulder. And this was right before I filed for divorce. And what we don't understand, or I didn't understand, I can only speak from my own point of view, that we go through a lifespan of psychology. And to grab her book and look at my age and look at where I am in that lifespan. It was so interesting to see that book and that instructor read my mail, but also to see where my daughter was and to see where my son was where they are. And I think it's so important for us, getting back to being actually a single mother, it's so important for us to come alongside of our children where they are, right, how they are, in the mindset that they are in, and realize their position so that we aren't intruding my 52-year-old brain onto a 21-year-old brain. I must know where she is in her walk and think about the things that even I missed in that walk because I was married, and there's things I didn't walk through in my developmental psychology. But as you know, Elise, there are, in your profession, we all are developing at different stages and different ages. And my son cracks up. He's like, oh my gosh, I have a 24-year-old mom. So it's kind of, you've got to reach for the fun in it as well. You can bog down in seriousness, but really simplicity is the new sophistication. And as if we can be just more simple in our relationships and identify those and make our children proud of who we are with and those relationships that we do allow in. And Lynette, I am bouncing back to the finance still. When I read that in your book, that you were actually in a food line, and you were at a food bank, and, I was like, I cannot even relate to that. I am just so amazed at the life that you've lived.
I keep that EBT card actually in my wallet.
What a reminder.
If I were to open my wallet right now, I have it in there because, a lot of people, when they, especially the farther away you get from, your situation, it's almost like the less likely people believe that you ever went through, that situation. And even on this, Easter weekend, I'm reminded that even the resurrected Jesus had to show his scars, because there would be people that would not believe everything he went through, but for the fact that he was able to show the scars. And then people are like, oh, okay, yeah, you did go through something traumatic. Well, all of us on this call have gone through a life trauma. It's a grievable situation. Okay. It's like, and we have to go through all the stages of grief, even though it's the death of a relationship, just as if someone had in fact died. It was just the marriage died. But you still have to go through the anger, the disbelief, all of those stages of grief and everything. But I saved that card just as a visual reminder to me, but also just as proof that the Lynette you see today, let's rewind 15 years, was in a totally different situation. And I know we're coming to the end of our segment here. And so I'll just kind of touch, with this is that, if there's anything I've learned in my single post-divorce life, is that God is not a respecter of persons, and that anything that he has done for me, he can do it for Elise, he can do it for Cindy, he can do it for Shay, he can do it for anyone that's listening to our voices this morning. I wish we had more time. I allowed us to go. This is actually a little extra bonus session because we usually do it for about 30 minutes, and now we're coming up on 45. So we have a little extra 15 minutes of content here. And so I'm going to ask each of you as we wrap it up, if there is just one little word of encouragement that you would have to, someone who is now finds himself as a, single mom, what one, phrase or thought of encouragement would you like to leave them with? We'll start with you, Cindy.
Only one. It's impossible.
I know. We'll have to do this again.
I would say evolve or repeat. If you stay in those same shoes, it's not going to change. And be encouraged that, as Lynette said, there are others who have gone before you. When I first had a baby, I thought, well, every person here was born. I can give birth. There's been a mother. So, but at any rate, evolve or repeat. So just keep moving. Keep one step in front of the other. God only shines the light on our next step. Don't look too far ahead. Concentrate on the day.
All right. Thanks. How about you, Shay?
I would say like you were saying about your scars become your testimony, but also become the light for others. So whether you went through this for you or to teach so that your kids don't go make the same mistakes or go through that, or to help other people, even though we don't know the reason right now, everything happens for a reason. And just look to God, pray. God is there. He is close to the brokenhearted, and he will restore everything the enemy has stolen. So just, stay hopeful, and God is always going to be with you.
And at least you get the last word.
Yeah.
All right. I will say invest in yourself. Even if it's just one thing that's, a self-help book, positive affirmations, a podcast, music, small groups, counseling, a mentor, just something that you use to pour back into yourself. Because really, that self-love, that self-care is the foundation of everything, of how you make decisions, your relationships, how you parent, really just how you live life. And so if that foundation of self-worth is broken and damaged, you will continue to repeat cycles of chaos and abuse, and things like that will continue to revisit you if you don't pour back into yourself and invest in your own worth and in your being. So that's my advice.
Well, there you have it. This has been another episode of Permanent Changes Station. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Permanent Change of Station. Tune in each week for the latest episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. You can find PCS Podcast online at pcspodcast.live and on social media. And while you're at it, don't forget to rate, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. We'll catch you in the next episode.